There is a particular kind of pain that comes from being made into the villain of your own life story. My name is Robert, and for the past year, I lived through exactly that. My wife, Melissa, and I had been married for 12 years, raising 2 children, Emma and Tyler, in a home that outwardly looked stable but had quietly been unraveling for longer than either of them ever knew. What they didn't know, what nobody knew, was that their mother had spent months rewriting the story of our marriage to everyone around her, including our own children, and I had the evidence to prove it. The trouble began subtly, the way most serious things do. Melissa started working later, canceling family dinners, and growing distant in ways she blamed entirely on stress from her job. I didn't push at first, choosing patience over confrontation, hoping whatever had shifted between us would settle. But one evening, I overheard her on the phone in the garage, her voice sharp and certain, telling someone that she was done pretending and that she had already started planning her exit. I stood frozen by the door, realizing the woman I loved had been quietly building a future that didn't include me, long before I ever suspected anything was wrong. Instead of confronting her that night, I made a decision that would define the next 12 months of my life. I began recording our conversations, not out of malice, but out of self-protection, sensing that whatever was coming would eventually twist the truth against me. I kept a small recorder in my jacket pocket during arguments, and later, with mounting suspicion, I set up a legal, disclosed recording app on our shared home assistant device, the kind our state allowed for one-party consent. I wasn't trying to trap her. I was trying to survive whatever story she was preparing to tell. Over the following months, the arguments grew sharper, and so did Melissa's accusations. She began telling our children, carefully and gradually, that I was checked out, that I didn't care about this family anymore, that I was the reason our home felt tense. Emma, only 10, started looking at me with quiet suspicion during dinner. Tyler, 13, stopped asking me to help with his homework the way he used to. I watched my own children's perception of me shift, piece by piece, shaped entirely by a narrative I hadn't yet found the strength to counter. The breaking point came on a Sunday afternoon when Melissa sat both children down in the living room and told them, in front of me, that I had abandoned this family a long time ago, and that she had been holding everything together alone. I stood in the doorway, stunned into silence, watching Emma's eyes fill with tears and Tyler's jaw tighten with quiet anger directed entirely at me. Melissa didn't know that the smart speaker on the bookshelf behind her, disclosed to her from the start as a household recording device for safety and memory purposes, had captured every single word of that conversation. That night, after the children were asleep, I sat Melissa down calmly and told her I needed to show her something. I played back 3 recordings, not just from that Sunday, but from months earlier, moments where she had openly admitted to planning her exit, moments where she had coached herself on what to tell the kids, moments that directly contradicted the version of events she had been feeding our children for weeks. Her face drained of color as she listened to her own voice laying out a plan she assumed no one had ever heard. She tried to explain, tried to argue that context mattered, that she had been overwhelmed and said things she didn't fully mean. But the recordings didn't lie, and neither did the pattern across them, a consistent, deliberate effort to reshape our children's understanding of their father while she prepared to leave. I told her calmly that I understood people say things in anger, but this wasn't anger. This was strategy, repeated over months, aimed at children too young to know they were being carefully positioned against me. When the marriage officially ended weeks later, the custody evaluation became far more complicated than either of us expected. Our court-appointed mediator requested documentation supporting both parents' claims about the children's home environment, and my recordings, legally obtained and properly disclosed, became central evidence. They showed a consistent pattern of one parent working to alienate the children from the other, a pattern family courts take seriously when determining custody arrangements. Melissa's version of events, so carefully built over months of conversations with our kids, unraveled entirely under the weight of her own recorded words. The custody arrangement that followed reflected that reality. I was granted significantly more parenting time than either of us initially expected, alongside a court-ordered requirement for co-parenting counseling focused specifically on rebuilding honest communication between Melissa and our children. It wasn't a victory I celebrated. It was simply the truth, finally allowed to stand on its own after months of being quietly buried under a narrative designed to make me the villain of a story I never chose to be part of. Rebuilding trust with Emma and Tyler took far longer than untangling the legal proceedings ever did. Children don't unlearn months of subtle messaging overnight, even once the truth becomes clear. I spent that first year after the divorce showing up consistently, answering their questions honestly without ever weaponizing what Melissa had done, and slowly watching their guarded distance soften into something closer to the relationship we'd once had. Tyler eventually asked me directly why I recorded everything, and I told him honestly, not to hurt his mother, but because I refused to let silence be mistaken for absence. Looking back now, I don't feel proud of needing to protect myself that way, recording conversations in my own home like evidence in a case I never wanted to build. But I've learned that sometimes protecting the truth means preparing for the moment someone tries to rewrite it. Melissa assumed her version of events would simply become reality because she said it first, and said it often. She never imagined that the quiet man she called absent had been paying closer attention than anyone, the entire time, for the sake of two children who deserved to eventually know exactly who had actually stayed.